he found her beneath the weight of a dying sun, half buried in dust, tied to a crooked post like an old warning the earth itself forgot to take down. The wind carried no mercy that day, only the taste of blood and heat. Private Eli Turner of the 7th Cavalry pulled his horse to a halt, the leather reins trembling in his fist. He'd seen men die before, too many to count, but never like this, never left to the flies, stripped of dignity, hung between earth and sky. The sign nailed above her head said, "White man, don't forgive." It shook softly in the wind like a whisper meant for ghosts. Her wrists were bound raw, her lips cracked open by thirst, still breathing, barely. An Apache woman, young, proud even in her ruin, with eyes like embers refusing to die. Eli dismounted slow, boots sinking into the sand. Every instinct screamed, "Walk away." Orders were clear, no dealings with hostiles. But orders don't bleed. Orders don't look back at you with eyes that still want to live. He cut her down. The rope came loose, and she fell into his arms, light, trembling, burning with fever. For a second, he just held her there, listening to the sound of her breath against his chest, and the desert around them felt like it stopped to watch. He carried her to a patch of shade beneath a thorn tree, poured the last of his canteen against her lips. She drank like it hurt, and maybe it did. The sun burned low, crawling toward the horizon like a wounded animal. Eli sat beside her, cleaning the dust from her face with his handkerchief. The bruises told a story. She'd been beaten, dragged, left for the vultures, but not by soldiers. The cuts were crude, done in anger, not uniform. "Who did this to you?" he whispered, though he knew she couldn't understand. Her eyes fluttered open. For a moment they met his, fierce and frightened, but alive. She said something soft, in her language. He didn't know the words, but he felt what they meant. "Don't hurt me." He shook his head. "No, I ain't gonna hurt you." The words came out low, like a promise he wasn't supposed to make. Night crawled in slow. Coyotes began their hymns somewhere over the ridge. Eli sat awake, with his rifle across his knees, the girl wrapped in his coat beside the fire. He knew what would happen if his unit found her. She'd be finished before dawn. A hostile in their territory had no right to breathe. By morning, she could stand, barely. Eli helped her walk toward a small creek that cut through the red soil. She drank, washed her face, and when she looked up, there was something new in her eyes. Caution, yes, but something that looked almost like trust. He caught himself staring longer than a soldier should. When he asked her name, she touched her chest and said, "Tayanita." It sounded like a prayer more than a name. "Eli," he said back, touching his chest the same way. She nodded once, understanding. The world beyond the canyon whispered danger. If the patrols rode through, he'd be court-martialed for treason, or worse. But leaving her meant death. Eli scouted ahead, found an abandoned hut left by trappers long ago. That night, they hid there, two outcasts bound by nothing but survival. He couldn't sleep. His thoughts kept circling back to her face in the firelight, the quiet strength behind her silence, the scars that looked like maps of a war no one ever won. Somewhere between the crackle of wood and the ache in his chest, he realized mercy had turned into something deeper, something he couldn't name yet. 3 days passed. Smoke rose in the distance, a cavalry patrol.
Eli's heart sank. They were sweeping the valley. Tyanita saw the fear on his face. She stepped back, shaking her head. She knew. She didn't want to be the reason he died. But he wasn't about to let her be taken again. He grabbed his rifle, the one he'd cleaned 100 times before, but never aimed for the right reasons. "Stay behind me," he said, motioning her toward the rocks. The horses came fast, 3 riders, blue coats glinting like knives in the sun. Eli fired first. One fell, the others scattered. The sound echoed through the canyon, and for a heartbeat, the world stood still again. Just him, her, and the ringing ghost of gunfire. He didn't look proud, he just looked tired. War wasn't supposed to feel like protection. But in that moment, it did. That night, they fled deeper into the desert, where the stars burned cold and close enough to touch.
Days bled together after that. No maps, no plans, just survival and the rhythm of 2 hearts learning to trust. Tyanita taught him her words in whispers: water, sky, friend. He taught her his: hope, safe, stay. Sometimes she laughed, a sound soft enough to make the desert feel alive again. Other times she'd stare into the distance, eyes haunted by memories of smoke and soldiers. One night, by the campfire, she reached for his hand. Not with fear, not with need, but with quiet gratitude. Eli looked at her and realized he'd crossed a line somewhere he couldn't come back from. He didn't care. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. He whispered her name like it was the only truth left in the world. The desert wind carried no judgment, only the soft sound of 2 souls who weren't supposed to meet, and yet, somehow, did.
The silence of the desert didn't last long. By dawn, riders were on their trail, men Eli once saluted, men who would hang him without blinking. He and Tyanita rode hard through the canyon, her arms wrapped tight around him as the horse thundered beneath the crimson sky. Gunfire cracked in the distance. Bullets bit into the rocks. They found shelter in a cave near the dry riverbed. Eli pressed his hand against the wall, listening to the hoofbeats fade, his pulse still pounding louder than the gunfire. Tyanita's hands trembled as she cleaned a scrape on his arm. When he winced, she said something soft, a word he didn't understand, but he knew it meant stay alive. He smiled faintly. "I'll try." Outside, the wind howled through the canyons, and the desert swallowed their footprints whole.
That night, when the world finally went quiet, Tyanita told him her story. Her village had been burned 2 summers ago, caught between 2 armies that both called her people the enemy. She lost her father, her brothers, her name. The men who left her to die weren't soldiers. They were settlers, angry after a raid they blamed on her tribe. She was the message they wanted the desert to carry. Eli listened, his jaw tight, his hands shaking. He thought of every order he'd followed without question, every village he'd ridden past with smoke still rising. War looked different when you saw who it really hurt. When she finished, she stared into the fire. "I should hate you," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "Maybe you should." But she looked up, and for the first time there was no anger in her eyes, just sorrow, and something that looked dangerously like forgiveness. By the 5th day in hiding, their supplies were gone. The horse limped, worn to the bone. The soldiers would circle back soon, he knew it. Eli stood at the mouth of the cave, looking east, where the sun rose like a burning brand. If he turned her in, he could live. If he stayed with her, he'd die. Simple math, but love ain't a soldier's arithmetic. He turned back toward her, her hair tangled from wind, her eyes steady, waiting for him to decide. "We keep riding," he said. Tayanita tilted her head, confusion in her gaze. He pressed his hand over his heart, then hers. Together. She understood. Maybe she had from the start.
They rode for 2 more days across a land that wanted to kill them both. The sun was merciless, and death followed behind on steel hoofs. When the cavalry found them again, Eli didn't run this time. He stood between her and the rifles, rifle lowered, palms open. The lieutenant, a man Eli once called brother, stared at him like he was looking at a ghost. "Turner," he said, "what the hell did you do?" Eli's voice came out steady. "What's right?" They called him a traitor. They raised their guns. But before the smoke could bloom, the canyon erupted. A band of Apache riders swept down from the ridge, arrows slicing the dawn in half. Eli grabbed Tayanita's hand and ran. The chaos behind them sounded like thunder. They didn't look back, not once.
By the time the gunfire faded, the sun had climbed high, and the world felt new again. They reached the far valley, a hidden place where green broke through red dust, where water shimmered beneath cottonwood trees. Tayanita led him to a sacred spring her people once called the heart of the earth. She knelt beside it, whispering prayers for the dead, then turned to him. "You can go," she said quietly. "Safe now." Eli looked at her, at the woman he'd found hanging between life and death, and who'd somehow taught him how to live again. "I'm already home," he said. The wind carried their silence like a hymn. He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. And somewhere between the shadows of war and the promise of morning, 2 souls the world tried to bury chose to rise instead. The desert didn't forgive, but it remembered. The story of a soldier who disobeyed the world just to keep one heartbeat alive.